Imagine being told by God himself to eradicate every man, woman, and child in an entire city. Not just soldiers, not just the guilty, everyone. We completely destroyed them, just as we did to Sihon, king of Heshbon, completely destroying every city, men, the women, and the small children. These aren't the words of some random bloodthirsty warlord. These are the sacred texts of the Bible, revered by billions as the Word of God. In this video, we're going to explore the most disturbing passages in the Bible. Divine commands to slaughter entire populations, including children, and ask the questions most religious leaders don't want to address. Did God really order genocide? Are these stories historical fact or ancient propaganda? And what do they tell us about the evolution of our moral understanding? The Bible doesn't hide its violence. In fact, it celebrates it. The book of Joshua details the conquest of Canaan, what believers call the promised land. But this promise came with a horrifying command. From the cities of these peoples, whom Yahweh your God is about to give to you as an inheritance, you must not leave anything alive that breathes. Deuteronomy 20:16-18. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a divine mandate. Total annihilation of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, men, women, children, even livestock. The Hebrew word for this practice was harem, complete destruction as an offering to God, not mere killing, but sacred killing, holy genocide. Today's religious leaders often avoid these texts, or they sanitize them. They say God's justice is beyond our understanding. They claim these stories are merely symbolic, or the language is hyperbolic, just ancient war rhetoric. But the text itself argues otherwise. Consider the story of King Saul, commanded to utterly destroy the Amalekites. Now go, strike Amalek, and completely destroy all that he has, and do not have pity on him, but put to death everyone from man to woman, from child to infant, from bull to lamb, from camel to donkey. 1 Samuel 15:3. When Saul spares the Amalekite king and the best livestock, God rejects him as king. The crime? Not killing thoroughly enough. This wasn't hyperbole. This was deadly serious. The text treats Saul's mercy as rebellion against God. To understand these biblical atrocities, we need to place them in their historical context. The ancient Near East was dominated by powerful empires: Assyria, Babylon, and Egypt. And these empires had their own traditions of imperial conquest and divine mandates. The conquests described in Joshua bear striking similarities to Assyrian royal inscriptions. In these inscriptions, Assyrian kings boast of divine approval for their conquests and describe total destruction of enemy cities. One Assyrian inscription reads, "I put to the sword the population of the city, a dangerous enemy, and I did not spare a single one. I hung their corpses on poles and placed them around the city." Sound familiar? The authors of Joshua were using the literary conventions of their time, the same propaganda techniques employed by the dominant empires. These weren't unique divine commands. They were part of a common ancient Near Eastern tradition of justifying conquest through divine mandate. But there's a critical twist here. While archaeological evidence confirms widespread destruction in Canaan during the late Bronze Age to early Iron Age transition, the timeline doesn't match the biblical narrative. Many cities mentioned in Joshua's conquest were either unoccupied at the time or show no evidence of destruction during this period. The biblical accounts of total destruction appear to be more theological than historical. Stories crafted centuries later to explain Israel's presence in the land and to justify their exclusive worship of Yahweh. Defenders of these texts often claim the Canaanites deserved destruction because of their extreme wickedness, child sacrifice, sexual immorality, idolatry. In Genesis, God tells Abraham his descendants will return to Canaan in 4 generations because the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. Genesis 15:16. The argument goes, God waited patiently until these cultures became so corrupt that total destruction was the only option, like a surgeon removing cancer. But this defense raises troubling questions. Were the infants and children equally guilty? Was there truly no possibility of redemption for entire populations? And more importantly, if we applied this standard consistently, what human culture throughout history would be safe from divine judgment? The Bible itself offers counterpoints to its own narrative of destruction. Consider the stories of Rahab and the Gibeonites, Canaanites who were spared because they acknowledged Yahweh's power. These exceptions reveal that the door was open, at least slightly, to those who would submit to Israel's God. The command for total destruction wasn't as absolute as it first appeared. But Rahab the prostitute and the house of her father and all that she had Joshua left alive. And she has lived in the midst of Israel until this day, because she hid the messengers that Joshua sent out to spy out Jericho. Joshua 6:25. In fact, the Bible's own narrative undercuts the success of the conquest. Despite claims of total victory, later passages admit that many Canaanites remained in the land. You are old and advanced in years, but a great deal of land remains to be possessed. Joshua 13:1. The theme of divinely sanctioned violence didn't end with the conquest narratives. It evolved into apocalyptic literature, visions of cosmic judgment where God finally vanquishes evil once and for all. In the New Testament's book of Revelation, Jesus himself is portrayed as a conquering warrior. From his mouth goes out a sharp sword, so that he might strike the nations, and he himself will rule them with an iron rod. Revelation 19:15. The language of total destruction is transformed but not abandoned. Now it's elevated to cosmic proportions, not just to the conquest of Canaan, but the judgment of all humanity. These apocalyptic visions served a purpose for oppressed communities. They provided hope that ultimate justice would come, even if present circumstances seemed hopeless. But they also carried danger. As biblical scholar John Collins notes, if people are told to expect a heavenly deliverer on a white horse who will annihilate their enemies, it may be difficult for them to restrain themselves from giving him a helping hand. Throughout history, apocalyptic thinking has fueled religious violence, from the Crusades to modern terrorist groups who see themselves as agents of divine judgment. Today, billions of people worldwide consider these texts sacred. Most never confront their most disturbing passages. When they do, they often resort to interpretive gymnastics to defend the indefensible. Some claim these stories never happened. They're just ancient hyperbole. Others insist God's ways are beyond our understanding. Still, others suggest these texts reflect an earlier, more primitive understanding of God that evolves throughout the Bible. What's undeniable is that these texts have been used to justify real violence throughout history. The conquest of Canaan became a template for European colonizers claiming divine right to take indigenous lands. Apocalyptic visions have inspired countless violent movements, convinced they were hastening God's judgment. The honest approach is to acknowledge these texts for what they are, products of their time, reflecting ancient understandings of divine justice that we have morally outgrown. Many progressive religious scholars now suggest we should neither ignore these texts nor defend them, but rather engage them as part of our moral evolution, learning from humanity's past mistakes as we develop more compassionate understandings of divinity. The stories of divine violence in the Bible confront us with profound questions. How do sacred texts evolve? How do our moral intuitions develop? What do we do when ancient traditions clash with our deepest moral convictions? Rather than abandoning these troubling texts or blindly defending them, perhaps we can see them as mirrors reflecting our own capacity for both violence and compassion, our need to justify our actions, and our continual struggle to understand justice in an unjust world. And the Bible itself contains the seeds of its own moral critique. Stories of outsiders like Rahab being welcomed, prophets challenging nationalism, and Jesus embracing enemies. These counter-narratives offer pathways beyond the violence. The dark side of the Bible isn't something to hide. It's something to confront, honestly and courageously. Only then can we truly understand how far we've come and how far we still have to go.